Hi, I'm Doug McBride for BehindTheHype.com. With us today, we're honored to have legendary rock photographer Robert Knight. Robert's life and photos are the focus of a new documentary film titled Rock Prophecies. The film makes its premiere August 7th at Hollywood's ArcLight Cinemas before hitting film festivals across the country. Robert, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
Your photos are the stuff of legend, and now with Rock Prophecies coming out, you've got a film about your life to prove it. Is it odd at all being in front of the camera all of a sudden after spending so many years behind the camera?
It's very odd, and I was incredibly uncomfortable with it, and still am uncomfortable with it, because I always had a problem with photographers who were more important than the people they took pictures of. And there's a sort of cult of celebrity in America, the celebrity chef, the celebrity photographer, the celebrity this and that. And I never really wanted to be one of those guys. So when I was approached on doing this project, it came to me as a reality show that was pitched to me by the Will and Grace producer, Tim Kaiser. He wanted to do a reality show on Ronnie Wood, who I work with, and he kind of brought up the, you know, what do you think Mick and all those guys would think? And I kind of dissuaded him from going there. And then we talked for 5 hours, and I was trying to get home to Las Vegas, and he said, I think we want to do this on you. Would you do a reality show? And I went, no. And I said, I got to go. And I called my wife and said, you're not going to believe this. They want to do a reality show. And she said, no. And he kept calling me. He kept nagging me. And I said, okay, if you do a documentary where I can talk about the people that allowed me to photograph them, I would do that.
How did you get your first shots of bona fide rock stars?
Jeff Beck was the first major rock artist that I ever photographed, but then he was in the Yardbirds, and that's where I focused my attention. And then Jeff told me about a band that Jimmy Page was putting together, and he said, wait till you hear and see this band. They're coming in 6 months. So I went in to see Jan Weiner at Rolling Stone and begged him to send me to LA for this premiere show of this band called the New Yardbirds. And eventually he said, fine, go down, see what you can do. And by the time I got there, they'd become Led Zeppelin, but that was a non sequitur name. No one knew what that meant. And I showed up at the Whiskey A Go-Go, and I said, I'm here from Rolling Stone magazine, I'm going to shoot the band. And she said, no, you're not, because you got to be 21 to get into the club. And I went, no. And she said, hold on. So she called the Chateau Marmont, got Jimmy Page on the phone. She said, there's this boy down here who wants to photograph the band. And Jimmy said, send him over to the Chateau. So I went up and spent the day with Jimmy Page and Robert Plant and John Paul Jones, and they didn't know anybody in LA. I mean, you know, Jimmy knew a few people, but I mean, basically these were young kids, and this was their first trip to America. It was their first show, and they brought me in with them that night. And so that's how I got into the whiskey and did those first shots of Led Zeppelin, and then I went to San Francisco with them the next day. Called the promoter in Hawaii, who I knew, and said, book this band, Tom. This band's going to be huge, and he did. And then 4 months later, they came to Hawaii, and I was the only person they knew, and we didn't have limos. So they sent me out in my Volkswagen, and I picked them up at the airport. So there's a very famous picture I have of Led Zeppelin getting off the plane, holding Led Zeppelin 2, and with all the lays and everything. And we hung out for about a week and a half, just absolute madness, surfing and flooding the house and water fights. And I mean, it was just great.
You've taken some iconic images of Jimi Hendrix. What was it like to actually meet him later on and have a relationship with him?
Well, the first thing is that, you know, when you spend a lot of time in the pit shooting up at rock stars, they all seem like they're 6.5 foot tall. So when you meet some of these guys for the first time and they're 5'6", it's interesting. And Jimmy was not at all what I thought he'd be like. I mean, he was actually quite a smaller guy, small frame, and very gentle. And, you know, that was a period of America where there was a lot of racial unrest, and there was a lot of this, the Panthers were around, and there was a lot of tension, and Jimmy wasn't into any of it. I mean, he had a predominantly white crowd, and I know he used to get grief from, you know, people, why do you got these white guys in the band? But Jimmy was very ecumenical about everything. And so when I met him, he was so gracious and just shy, really. He was a very shy guy. We're on stage, you know, I mean, that's the same thing with Elton John. You know, he was basically shy people, and on stage they're like exhibitionists.
Yeah.
It is interesting. But he was prolific, and there's a lot of unreleased Jimi Hendrix stuff that has been sort of in the can. They didn't want it to fall in the hands of other people. I know Stephen Stills has got 4 unreleased tracks that Jimmy did up at his house, so I think eventually we're going to see some new stuff, but the guy was prolific for a 3-year career.
You've found a way to remain relevant all these years, and You took some of the first shots of Jimmy, Led Zeppelin, all these other bands. What do you think those artists have in common with the artists that you're shooting nowadays, in particular Sick Puppies and Tyler Dow Bryant?
Well, all these artists have a passion. And it's kind of funny because I think somebody asked Eddie Van Halen one time, what would he have done had he not played the guitar? And he went, will you have fries with that? Because basically these guys were born and there was nothing else that they were going to be capable of doing. And that is the thing that I spot. When I meet a young artist and they have that drive and that passion, you know, this is what they were born. This is what their destiny was. They've known it before they knew it, you know? And so that's what they have in common is that, you know, when I found the Puppies, I saw that passion. When I saw Tyler Bryant, I just went, this is unbelievable.
Are there any photos that you look at and represent something emotional to you about the time, or in particular just friendships and so forth?
Well, I think the ones that stand out the most to me were the Stevie Ray Vaughn photos, because obviously Stevie asked me to come to this very special concert with Eric Clapton. It wasn't going to happen again. This was sort of his first time to ever play with Eric. And they were going to do a poster of all the Fender guys there. So Stevie asked me to be the photographer, and I got to go there a couple days early, and we hung out, and we had very, very long, in-depth conversations about life and death. And Stevie used to come to LA and just to have lunch with me to talk about sobriety, because I had never done any drugs, and Stevie was always fighting that demon of wanting to but not, you know? Mm-hmm. So he was always saying, how could you have been around Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and all these people and not been partying? So it just, you know, I just chose not to. So he had this sort of premonition he was going to die. I mean, he could feel it. He told him, he said, Dr. John told me I'm going to die soon. And he was starting to talk about all these sort of weird things. And there was all this synchronicity going on. Because I said to Stevie, do you realize that Otis Redding died over here at this lake, right near where we are? And he goes, my manager was his manager. There was a lot of that kind of stuff.
Wow. That
whole day. So when we did that shoot, and I had unprecedented access, because Eric Clapton does not like photographers. I mean, he doesn't dislike them personally, but he just doesn't like being able to see them. So he doesn't want anybody in the pit, and you know, he pushes them way back. He just doesn't like it. And I was the only photographer allowed to shoot that day. They had sent everybody else home, so I had all day to myself with everybody backstage, everything. Very important pictures. I was so pleased. And then in the morning when I woke up and found out Stevie had died, the whole world imploded. And I knew what I had, because my phone was going crazy of people wanting access to it, and I just shut it down for 2 years. I didn't let anything out. And I could have made a fortune, but that's blood money, and that's not who I am.
What kind of advice would you give to young people who see the movie, see what you've done, and want to do something creative, but they're not sure how to go about it?
Yeah, interestingly, while we were doing the film around the country at some of the film festivals, I've been invited to universities and schools to speak motivationally to students. And I was thinking, motivational? I don't know anything about it. But what I did is I got up and said, look, I am the son of a Baptist minister from one of the roughest areas of Honolulu, that you couldn't be more backwater, and yet I have worked with the biggest rock bands in the world. What that means is no matter where you are, if you're in someplace in Iowa or if you're in Terra del Fuego, do not give up. You have got to believe in yourself. You have got to believe in the vision. And you see, intention is so important. You can visualize whatever it is you want to do, because I have done this my entire life. If there's a band, I will figure out a way how to get to them. You can do it, and that's, you know, that is the key.
Robert, thank you again.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
You've been watching BehindTheHype.com with our special guest, Robert Knight. His film, once again, debuts on August 7th at Hollywood's ArcLight Cinemas, where it will enjoy a week-long stay before hitting film festivals across the country. At this stage, you've got a film about your life, and I guess that brings up the notion of legacy. How would you like to be thought of by future generations?
He made me look good. That would be the best compliment, you know? He made me look good.